Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'll be sharing Skinwalker stories. Let's get into it. Story 1. While trading stories around a campfire, my friend recalled an encounter he had while serving an LDS mission. My friend's mission region had a reservation within its boundaries. However, it was relatively far from where he was serving. On one occasion, him and his mission companion were asked to travel farther than usual to meet with some investigators. This took them near the reservation. On their way home, their car ran out of gas, and it wasn't until late at night that they were able to continue their journey home. My friend, who was driving while his companion slept in the passenger seat, chose a different route that took him through some back roads in an attempt to get home sooner. He told us he was driving about above the speed limit when he noticed movement in the woods lining the road. Because coyotes were common in the area, he took little notice at first. Then he looked out the window and slammed on the brakes. The sudden stop jolted his companion awake, who immediately wanted to know what was wrong. My friend was shaken and said he would tell him once they got home. He asked him to say a prayer, and he gunned it. By the time they made it home, his companion was dying to know what happened. My friend told him, "I looked down at the road next to the car and saw 6 men running on all fours, keeping up with the car. I was driving 40 miles an hour." Story 2. This is my father's story written from his perspective. When I was about 11 or 12, we lived in a small house made of mud and stone, a lot like our house now. It was 2 of my brothers and I in the house. Everyone else had gone to the Jamez feast and left us to tend the sheep. We were getting ready for bed when we heard the dogs going crazy outside. Thinking it was nothing more than coyotes howling in the distance, we told them to be quiet. We began to drift into sleep, and the dogs would not shut up. Somehow I was able to go to sleep for a few hours. Then I woke up very late in the night. It was very quiet and still in the house, save for my brother's snoring and breathing. I realized I needed to use the outhouse and woke up my brother to take me there. He teased me about being scared, which I certainly was. We went out with our flashlight to the outhouse. The dogs began with their crazed barking out in the sagebrush, going from one place to the next. My brother went first, and I waited outside for him. While waiting, I tried to follow the dogs with my flashlight. Suddenly there was a very loud whine from one of the dogs. Then everything went quiet again. It was really too quiet for that time of year. Not even the sheep were making noise. Suddenly I heard a few of the dogs going completely mad by the truck. When I looked over, there was this man. He was unbelievably tall, leaning one arm on the cab roof of the truck. He was looking at the dogs for a little, and then suddenly kicking one of them. They all scattered in different directions. The thing looked up at me and I saw its face. It had a pure white face, like a full moon, 2 burning red eyes, and a slight smile that was pure black. I could not move or make a sound. It began to walk towards me with long strides until it finally towered over me. All I began to see was a dark red, like the color of the blood when you cut the throat of a sheep. I kept getting deeper and deeper into its eyes. I could faintly hear my brother coming out of the outhouse. With this, the thing looked up at him. Reality came rushing back to me. I noticed that my brother was too distracted with his buckle to realize what was going on. I also noticed this thing's long hands hovering just inches from my head. Its skin was black ash, and he smelled like a bloated dead animal in summer. I was still unable to move or speak. The Skinwalker began to move toward my brother, finally noticing this figure. My brother became paralyzed as I was. Closer and closer it drew, reaching an arm out towards my brother's head. Something finally snapped in me. I became unbearably angry. I broke from the trance and lunged at the Skinwalker, raising my arms like a wild animal and baring my teeth at it. A growl came out that I never knew I could make. I became more and more angry at the thing that was trying to hurt us. It kept that smile at first, but the angrier I got, the more smile faded. Finally, with everything I had, I began to make this primal roar at it. It fell backwards and ran away into the night. Looking back at me, its eyes were dim and dull, its smile now long since gone. The next morning, the family returned home from the feast. After relaying the story to my parents, they quickly hired a medicine man. Story 3. Whenever my mom would take us on a road trip to her hometown on the Navajo reservation, I'd occasionally ask her to tell me a Skinwalker story along the way. I remember every story she's told me was when we were driving through miles of nothing at night. Luckily, nothing ever happened to us during those drives. Anyways, this is one of those stories that came from my auntie. So my auntie and some of her friends used to party a lot back in the day. They'd hop in a beaten down van, drive out to the boondocks and just drink and have fun. Of course, this all took place on the Navajo reservation after sunset on this particular night. That's what they were doing. Everything was going good and whatnot when all of a sudden they hear what sounds like big rocks being thrown at their van. Everyone gets quiet as they wonder what the hell is going on. The sounds of rocks being thrown stops, and then suddenly something jumps on top of the van roof. I could mention my family owned a white van that we would use for the long road trips because it had enough room for all my brothers and me. So imagine young me being told this story in a van. Terrifying. Everyone starts panicking as the realization sets in and hurry to lock all the doors. My auntie jumps in the driver's seat and tries to start the engine. Of course, the beaten down van refuses to start. Whatever is on the roof is still up there making banging noises at this point, like it's jumping up and down. My auntie is freaking out when she then sees a hand with long nails reach over the roof and start scratching the windshield. At this point in the story, my mom would take one hand off the steering wheel and scratch the windshield to simulate it. Then whatever was on the roof jumped off. Everyone is still freaking out, yelling at my auntie to start the van, and she keeps trying. That's when she sees the Skinwalker walk up the driver's side window and stare at her from just a few inches away. Well, that's when my auntie jumped in the back and started praying for her life. Minutes pass and the Skinwalker appears to leave. My auntie hops back in the driver's seat, gets the van to start, and off they go. Story 4. My grandmother on my mother's side has always been very superstitious, for lack of a better word. She's not religious, but she doesn't believe in a lot of paranormal stuff. Her mother was full-blooded Navajo, and her father was Irish. Either way, she'd never been anywhere east of Montana. She grew up in Nevada. One year when I was in grade school, I went to visit her. Most of the visit was pretty uneventful. Typical boring old people stuff. Except she always kept her curtains drawn shut and would always peek out of the window when someone asked what she was doing. She would simply reply, "Yana Lucy is watching me." This went on for nearly the entire visit until a few days ago before we were due to leave. My grandma and my then baby brother, he's now 19, were in the front yard that evening planting flowers when all of a sudden my grandmother starts shouting, "Johnny, get away from the creature. It's not safe." Of course, being in Nevada, we all assumed that my brother had found a scorpion or a rattlesnake, so we would all run outside to see my grandmother clutching my little brother and shaking in terror against the side of the house. Standing out in the yard was a large, black Great Dane-sized dog. It was staring at my grandmother with an intensity I'd never seen before. It looked up at us, gave a little huff, and bounded off. I don't remember if it moved unusually fast or not, but I do remember it had really deep yellow eyes. When my mother asked my grandmother what had happened, she kept repeating, "The Yanalushi has found me." She moved a couple of weeks after that. Story 5. I was told this story once. My dad isn't a bullshitter or a liar, so I know the story is true. So this was the very early 80s. My sister, who lived in Toronto, came down to visit our parents for a weekend. She was staying at a friend's house, who loaned her a car so she could come out. After her visit, she left a little after 9 p.m. She got maybe 8 to 7 miles away when the car broke down. Thankfully, she broke down in front of a friend of the family's house. They let her in to call Dad, and Dad came to get her. The family said she could leave the car in their driveway for the night, and my sister decided to just stay at my parents' for the night. It was now a little after 10 p.m. and pitch black, late November, while my sister and Dad are driving back to the house, and they pass through a heavily wooded area. Out of nowhere, they hear this incredibly loud, inhuman scream that was heard over the engine, them talking and the radio. Dad slammed on the brakes, and they both started freaking out when suddenly a 6-foot tall coyote, walking on two legs and a black and white striped tail, appeared on the side of the road and proceeded to walk in front of the car. As soon as it passed, that same scream played again, only this time 10 times louder. Dad slammed on the accelerator and they got the hell out of there. It was never seen again. Story 6. My roommate has told me this story a few times, and I want to see if anyone else has had similar experiences. As he tells it, he was driving home super late at night, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m. in a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, both times that this occurred. The first time he was driving alone on a road that has an open field to the left of it, when out of nowhere a black figure on all fours bounded up out of the field and across the road in front of his car. As soon as the figure got to the other side of the road, it stops with inhuman quickness, turns around, and looks directly at my roommate. He described the figure as looking simian, completely black except for the face. The creature's face was a stark white human face, not white as in Caucasian, but white as snow. This happened again a few weeks later, but this time the creature was sitting in a tree. As his car approached, it climbed down the tree, again with inhuman quickness, bounded across the road, stopped on a dime and turned around and made eye contact with him. This time he had a friend in the car who also saw it and began freaking out. It was the same exact thing as the first time. A simian black body with a snow-white, expressionless human face. My roommate, ever the curious one, turned the car around and began searching for the creature, but it was nowhere to be seen. Story 7. In Hunt for the Skinwalker, George Knapp and Colm Kelleher relate the stories of those who came into contact with skinwalkers near Native American tribal lands. One account from a New Mexico Highway Patrol officer states that while patrolling the highways of New Mexico, he saw a skinwalker on 2 separate occasions. In his first encounter, a creature wearing a white mask appeared next to his window, seemingly attaching itself to the car door, but then he realized it was simply running beside the vehicle, keeping pace at highway speeds. A few days later, and around the same area, he encountered the creature again. What makes his tale even more intriguing is that at least one other officer claimed to have seen the same ghoulish being while patrolling the area. Story 8. On the Ghost Stories blog Darkness Prevails, user John shared his story of how a relaxing midnight stroll turned terrifying when he came face to face with 2 skinwalkers. According to his chilling story, John was out late one summer night. While listening to music and enjoying the cool weather, he walked near a large empty field that was adjacent to a college campus. Suddenly he felt something staring at him. Shining his flashlight out into the darkness, he saw 2 sets of glowing orange eyes staring back at him. The eyes were at least 7 feet off the ground and stared at him without blinking once. John made a mad dash for safety. As he was running, he turned back to see one of the creatures chasing him. John became even more frightened when he got a better glimpse of the fast-moving creature behind him. It looked like a giant wolf. Quickening his pace, John reached his home safely, but he remains fearful of the monsters he saw that night, which he believes were skinwalkers. Story 9. According to an account on the same blog, Not all skinwalkers are found around reservations, or even within the U.S. for that matter. This tale of terror comes all the way from Australia. While walking her dogs out in the Australian bush, a woman encountered a fearful sight. She was enjoying the trail when suddenly her two dogs started barking uncontrollably and became extremely agitated. Soon she saw what appeared to be a small female child, no older than 7. The child had her back to the woman, who was only a bit startled at first, as she believed the child was just part of a camping party. However, when the girl turned around, her eyes were lifeless and entirely black. Before the woman could make a break for it, the creature let out an ear-splitting howl and ran off into the bush, never to be seen again. She was left wondering if the child she saw was someone pulling a prank on her, or if it really was a shape-shifting skinwalker. She may never know. Story 10. There was one time I went camping with 2 of my buddies, but neither of them are real outdoorsy type. I was just kind of getting them into the whole camping hunting scene. Now I love hiking, exploring more like, because I hate just walking a trail. You're seeing nothing new. So took the 2 friends out there a ways and got 2 miles from camp when they just wanted to go back. I said fine and showed them where to go on my phone and made them put a waypoint on the other little GPS thing I had to follow. I wanted to keep going, so I did so by myself. They wanted the pistol I had on me for safety reasons, leaving me to walk alone in the forest with water and nothing else. No big deal, I thought. I found a steep hillside with rocks all the way down when I was about 5 miles from camp and decided to go down. I followed the path at the bottom of this thing, which was at this point just a dry riverbed. I walked down and it got steeper as I went further south. When I crossed a certain point, something just felt wrong. I started trying to look around for anything, but there was a huge log across the 2 hillsides, and when I crouched down to crawl under it, it felt like I was being watched. I looked up to my left, saw nothing. Looked around to see if there was anything in the middle of the riverbed, then looked up to the right. Huge black canine. Too small to be a bear, but it looked like a wolf on steroids. That dog creature and I held glances for what felt like hours, but I know it couldn't have been more than 10 seconds. Every passing moment made the feeling of dread worse. I moved backwards to get the hell out of there, and when I moved, the wolf thing just booked it into the forest, further from the camp. In hindsight, this thing was moving faster than any dog I've ever seen. It couldn't have been normal.